backwardness. This is the reality. Whichever context you put it in, it will not go outside of that one. And therefore, if any position is to be taken by scholars, by patriots, should all be really in light of that reality. Who do you side with? I know that in the 80s when PDP was in power, a lot of patriots, a lot of progressive elements sided with the backward Mujahideen groups, and the Americans and all these pro-democracy institutions in the West, they also provided weapons and ammunition and all the wherewithals in order to fight the forces of change, because they assume that this is a government that's dominated by their adversary, the Russians. Therefore, everything was justified to them. For Afghans, this should not be the case. For Afghans, the core of our issue should be the interest of our people and of our country, rather than which segment of the world, of the international community will benefit from it or will suffer from it. I'm posing this as an issue so we could concentrate on this during our discussion and walk away with some takeaways that will give us guidance for our future interaction and future contribution towards making a change in Afghanistan. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zarif Saib. If any of our speakers want to comment, Professor Wahab, I saw your... Go ahead, Professor Wahab, if you wanted to make a comment.
Yes, if I may. Thank you all very much. Thank you all very much. And with due respect, if you're on the ground in Afghanistan, or if you were there on August 14th, not 15th, and before that, we all know that then and now, before 2001 and after 2001, the vast majority of Afghans are poor. They live well below the international definition of poverty line. Most Afghans, men and women, are illiterate. Most children do not go to school. More than half of the school-age children are not in school. More than half the schools have or had no school buildings. The so-called democracy was a joke. It was a farce. It was a family and an ethnic group function. It was a mafiocracy. The 4 elections that we had over the last 20 years, I was there in all 4 of them. All of them were fraudulent. All of them were engineered by foreigners and by the local ruling clique. And a few people voted. The law did not mean anything. The presidents of the country themselves were the major violators of the Constitution of Afghanistan. The NGOs were there for their own glory, their own money-making. Tens of thousands of so-called experts and capacity builders came, but there's no capacity now. People can't even run an engine. So Afghanistan was poor before 2001, one of the poorest on every index. Human rights, women's rights, most women were and are still illiterate. Polygamy is common. Child marriage is common. Abuse of women is common. The majority of the women are illiterate. These were facts before 2001 and have been facts even now, with some changes, of course, improvements. What happened to the 140 billion people that supposedly came to Afghanistan to develop and modernize Afghanistan and bring freedom, progress, and prosperity? Drugs have increased. Addicts have increased. 3.5 million Afghans are addicts as we speak now. The country was occupied literally in every way by the foreigners, wall to wall. There were 250 bases all over the country. The country was totally made dependent on foreign aid. There was a vast gap between the city, Shahrinau, Wazir Akbar Khan, and the rest of the country. And if you go on the roads, even in Kabul, it's hard to drive on the roads. Where are the paved roads? And why was the country made so dependent that after August 15th, there's no money in the banks? People have nothing to eat. People have no income. People were not paid since May. what happened to all the money and what happened to things? I would say, no, this wasn't a struggle for change. This wasn't a mistake. All of this underdevelopment and complete dependency was designed and engineered by foreign intervention. The United States, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia. They do not want Afghanistan to become self-sufficient, self-reliant, and dignified, where people respect themselves. They don't want Afghanistan to become that kind of country, because that would be dysfunctional for the major superpowers in the world, but also for Afghanistan's neighbor. I would say, please, don't read reports and things. Visit Afghanistan and get out of Sharanau and Wazir Akbar Khan and see what's happening in Taimani or in Company. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Naja John, go ahead.
I do respect the panelists. I do respect their ideas, and I do understand what they mentioned about constitutional law, or about the election, or about the women's rights. When I was talking about at the beginning, I mentioned that what I was talking about the 2 decades, actually, that we are discussing the 2 decades, it should be 4 decades. Actually, we have to discuss about the 4 decades, that what happened in Afghanistan since 1980, 1979. Somebody like as an ordinary citizen, people who were banned from going to school during the time of the first time the Taliban were in power. So their only wish was to go to school because they were banned, and a number of people from Afghanistan migrated in that time. That migration happened because the people who had their daughters and they weren't able to be enrolled at school, those who did not have the right to go to work because they had to sit at home women. So those who were a bit financially stable, they left the country, and most of the other people, they were in Afghanistan. So for those people that the schools were banned at that time, when the schools are open, when they go to school, that's a change in their life. That is something like I can see that. I mean, I have been raised in Afghanistan. I have been in most part of Afghanistan there. So that wish of going to school, that wish of someone who is educated and who wants to go to work. But that's banned, and that was banned that time. So when they were able to go to work, when they were able to secure a scholarship and go abroad, if I talk actually about women, if the women were able that time that they could basically be enrolled in university, they could study, they could work, they have a business that they didn't have before. So that was a change in their lives. What happened 40 years before, 60 years before, I do understand that and I respect that. But that time, those who were living in the past, they could get advantage of those benefits that they were living during that time. But people who are right now, somebody who is right now 20 years old, and he had an ambitious dream to go to university. Somebody who was graduated to go and work. So they didn't have all those things actually before that. Even now they didn't have it, but they'd have that freedom to go to school or that. I did mention about the corruption that's going on, that was going and wasn't managed by Afghan people and wasn't managed by the internationals. So if there was problem with the system, we had direct involvement of the internationals in Afghanistan, and also not only in the design of the projects at the beginning, but also direct implementation of those projects inside Afghanistan, that a number of them failed. But at the same time, when we talk about the capacity, yes, so after 15 years, 10 years, 20 years, there should have been enough capacity. But unfortunately, we had a number of our well-educated people that they left Afghanistan. So the capacity was built inside or outside, but we didn't have those capacity inside Afghanistan. The capacities were limited. And even that the capacities were in Afghanistan, one of the things that I also see as a problem, somebody there, that we had a number of key positions within the government with double citizenship. We had that expertise inside Afghanistan. We had that expertise that somebody could run that that position. Ministry. But it was always focused for international, either Afghans international or not Afghans. They have to come to work for Afghanistan, and they had that easy access to leave anytime they wanted. So I just wanted to mention that the achievements that I mentioned myself, they were something that people compared to what was before 2001, after 2001, and we can see what's going on right now in Afghanistan, being the poorest country, the crisis, and everything. So that I was discussing about, and I do respect everything that our panelists said and about the realities of Afghanistan 40 years before and even long time before. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Najajan. I think it's by 1 o'clock now, so let me move on to the next question. Obviously, this itself can take many days and decades to just discuss this. But obviously, thank you for these enriching discussions, and I sense a trend of thoughts. But moving to the next question, so U.S. President Biden stated that the Afghan government was given more than enough weapons and training to hold its own against the Taliban. However, we're learning U.S. NATO was undermining the Ghani government months before the Taliban takeover in terms of reducing its air support, intelligence support, many other ways that they sort of stopped this. And the soldiers on the ground, from what my reading have sensed these sort of reduction and withdrawing of support. So, by undermining the Ghani government almost in a way that set the path for the Taliban to come back to power. Are there any thoughts about this? Because again, this is the question about, did they really lose the war? Or was they facilitated back into power? Something, I was thinking of Dr. Touhi and Sadr, and then anybody else who would like to pick up from there. Go ahead, Dr. Sadr first, go ahead.
Okay, well, I think, yeah, it's acknowledged that Afghanistan was an entire and independent state, and it was kept an entire independent state. Over 40% of its GDP and over 70% of its budget was dependent on foreign aid and donation. And now the misery which is going on in Afghanistan is because of the freezing of the funds, and you don't have that 70% of the budget and 40% of the GDP. Now, I think on US policy in Afghanistan, it is clear that Afghanistan was a case of international state building, right? So US was involved. However, I would like to reinforce now again the rule of national elites here. In 2014, the last president of Afghanistan, Ashraf Ghani, was responsible for the security transition. Mm-hmm. And when he took over office, he announced that he has successfully done the job of the security transformation from the international NATO troops to the national forces. And then for over 7 years, he ruled the country. Then at the end of his tenure, I mean the last year, he continuously accused the Americans that they are not allowing Afghans to fight. Now that they are leaving, we will have the free hand to fight our own fight, right? And then he was saying that we will be self-reliant. We have over 300,000 troops, which we can fight the Taliban. Now, all of his calculations were based on the wrong facts, figures, and data. He was continuously misleading the nation and his ministers and the bureaucrats. It was quite clear in the last months that we didn't have over 300,000 forces to fight the Taliban. And I mean, if you are the president of the country and you are not getting your facts straight and leaving the nation in a very crisis, in a deep crisis, and then leaving them, that is not the fault of US. It's fault of your leadership that you couldn't manage all of this. And of course, I mean, United States followed the wrong path of state building, reinforcing a very centralized state for a society which is naturally a decentralized, quite diverse mountainous country, right? Reinforcing the corrupt political elites through unaccountable funds, which was directly given to these warlords and elites. So, I mean, the wrong model of state building, the wrong model of democracy, the wrong model of market. Our democracy, either be it the electoral system or the model of center periphery or the model of executive, did not at all match the kind of society that we have. Look at the advanced developed democracies like Germany now. The transition from Angela Merkel to another prime minister is based on a very consensus model of democracy where Merkel leaves her office to not his own party member, but to another party leader in order to force such certain form of consensus. The Minister of Foreign Affairs now in Germany is coming from Green's party, right? But in Afghanistan, the political elite were not able to come together, even under national unity government. It was both because of the systematic problem, but also the self-centered, egoist politicians who could not overcome their own self-interest for the sake of the nation. So I mean, if we continue to reinforce the same very highly centralized presidential model with a wrong model of democracy in Afghanistan, we will not get a different outcome. I mean, it was not the problem of democracy. Democracy is not, let's not take it for granted. It's not just one type of democracy. And it's not just about the problem of a state per se, because we cannot take the state also for granted. We need to modify these formulas for your own socio-cultural context. And to a large extent, democracy and state building in the last 20 years could not match that socio-cultural context. That sensitivity was missing.
Thank you. Before I sort of ask Professor Touhi to address the same question, if you would like, Biden's statement that the Afghan government was given more than enough weapons and training to hold its own against the Taliban. However, we're learning that the US and NATO undermined the Ghani government or the government, months before the Taliban takeover. There's something that Professor Sadr says that the Afghan government was too centralized. And I know you're writing on state building. Do you find that also the issue? Do you find the Afghan governments, because I just want to address something about Michael Mann, when he talks about coercive infrastructure and, coercive powers and infrastructural powers. And, sort of the Afghan government was more like an absolutist French state where the state, was a paper tiger in terms of its constitutional rights, but in its capacity, then what happened to all these warlords if it's centralized? My whole understanding was that Afghanistan was not centralized enough. That's why we lost. Because if a state is really centralized, it has power in all its regions and warlords would not exist. The very fact of warlords actually means that it wasn't centralized. And that's why the state lost its legitimacy. If you don't lose legitimacy if you're centralized, because you essentially reach out to your regions by your schools, your health ministries and all that. It was precisely because the state wasn't able to reach that it lost its legitimacy, which means it wasn't centralized. So that's just something to think about. I don't know if Professor Touhi wants to address that. And then you could also address it. Go ahead, Professor. Go ahead.
Where did he go?
You raised a good question on infrastructural power and coercive power. Unfortunately, in the last 100 years, the state builders in Afghanistan imagined a very coercive state. They assumed a coercive state is a strong state. So efficiency of a state was equated with very form of centralization. infrastructural power is not about coercing the society. It's about how the society and the state interacts and how a state accommodates society, right?
Exactly.
You govern, regulate society with minimal resources. Exactly right. Now, in Afghanistan, constitutionally, all the system and all the power was vested with a few ministries, and the local governance was about extension of the same administration from the Kabul. You didn't have local government in the local, at the provincial level. They were all extension of the same administration. I mean, how is it possible to enforce a state's authority if you don't have resources, but also society also resists you? It's not possible. You need to accommodate, for example, at the very lower level, the lowest societal unit in Afghanistan is a village. Literally, a state didn't have institution to regulate villages, right? Mm-hmm. The alternative way was to accommodate the informal institutions, which for centuries, people organized their life around that. Now, state builders tried to marginalize, sideline the customary informal institutions, and instead they themselves were also not able to regulate it. So I mean, the problem was, you're right, that we followed very coercive European French model, but that is quite different. With lack of resources, you can't do it because you have very powerful informal institutions. Right. And the way is to not encounter them, rather to accommodate them, to negotiate with the society, which of course I think President Ashraf Ghani and many others assume that they can coerce society by use of force. We didn't need to have over 300,000 forces of army and police. To what extent Afghanistan can afford all of this from its indigenous sources? Literally impossible. It will be impossible for the next 50 years as well if we do not rethink all this model.
Thank you. Thank you. No, good points. Professor Touhi, could you address?
Sure. I think Professor Sadr made really good comments. My own view on this is that I think it's a misnomer to speak of an Afghan government or an Afghan state. I mean, if it really was a government, it wouldn't just go away in one day. So the fact that it just fell apart so quickly shows that there was no government. And there's no government right now, despite the fact that the Taliban wish to claim that they have defeated Americans. Right. So, and this is a historical fact. Afghanistan, the project of state building in Afghanistan has failed repeatedly. And the kind of problems that we have seen over the past 20 years or the past 40 years are just emanations of the fact that we don't have a state. Violence, corruption, mismanagement, misadministration, all of these are just emanations of the fact that there is no political order in this society. There is a bordered power container called Afghanistan. And you have internal and external actors operating for different purposes within this bordered power container. But it would be a misnomer to speak of this as a government or as a state. Historically speaking, the evolution of the modern state has a trajectory. So we had a traditional state in pre-modern societies, and traditional states ruled indirectly. You had a king who would rely on regional, power holders like the religious figures or local power holders, regional power holders. They paid taxes to the king. The king didn't really govern society. So after that, we have the bureaucratic state, the French model that you talked about. That was the classic example of a bureaucratic state, the beginning of building administration. And then the next phase, which really in historical Europe begins with the French Revolution, is the modern national state. It really comes to existence with that revolution. It implies a transition from indirect to direct rule, in the process of which what the rulers do is that they get rid of these regional and local power holders. They subjugate them, they bring them into the state bureaucracy, they make them functionaries of the state. And this process has happened in every developed society, you know. In our neighboring countries, in Turkey, in Iran, this happened in 19th and 20th century. In Afghanistan, there were attempts at this under Amir Abdurrahman Khan. He tried to, you know, transform Afghanistan from a traditional polity into a bureaucratic state. He failed. And then under Amanullah Khan, there is an attempt at really catapulting Afghanistan into national statehood, despite the fact that Afghanistan did not have the bureaucratic infrastructure to be able to do that. So I think one of the major reasons for the failure of Amanullah Khan is the prior failure of Abdurrahman Khan for creating a bureaucratic state. We have the same problem today. We have had it over the 20th century. We don't have a bureaucracy in Afghanistan. And that's why, you know, I was involved with the flawed elections of 2004 and 2005. When you don't know how many people you have in the society, what age they are, you know, where they live, it's very difficult to do anything that a modern state does. So even if you have the best of intentions, you can't do what you're supposed to do. So I don't think we should assume that everyone who was in Afghanistan had bad intentions. There were many people, you know, with good intentions there, but basically the structures were not there. Human beings, human actors operate under structures. And when you don't have the right structures, you can't expect human beings to you know, operate out of good intentions. That's not the whole point of the development of Western institutions, is to take things away from human beings, institutionalize things, so that human beings are forced to act in a certain way. And we don't have that in Afghanistan. So I think it's a misnomer when President Biden says that we gave the Afghan government everything. There was no Afghan government. So end of discussion, you know. There is no Afghan government today. There was no Afghan government really in the specific sense of it over the past century. So we are still a traditional polity, I believe. And our problems emanate from that traditionality. The fact that our society is not educated, that we don't have proper administrative structures, these are just manifestations of that traditionality of the Afghan polity.
Thank you. Okay. Yes, go ahead, Professor Wahab. Just a few minutes, because we would like to go to the next, because we want to prepare for the Q&A session. And just one thing before, Professor Sadr has left us because before he joined us, he had forgot his charger for his computer. And being that he had just recently come to the US, he didn't have the right plug. He looked all over. And so that's unfortunately why he left, not because he's upset or anything. And I would like to ask the NGO questions for Zarif Saib and Nojajan. But go ahead, Professor Wahab, did you want to make any observations or comments?
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Go on for the whole day. First, Biden should blame himself. If the government or the army or the security, the intelligence, the economy, etc., failed, he should ask himself why. He shouldn't blame the victims. He should blame the victimizers. You produced, brought, installed, and supported these people for the last 20 years. Who were they? You trained supposedly this army, the police, the intelligence, etc. What happened? And why should you fight for a government or a commander or a chief or a general that even takes your toothpaste and steals from your bread? Why should you fight by anybody? These people had not been paid for months, and supposedly the Americans were to pay them through their telephones. What happened to that payment? You introduced the massive corruption, the mismanagement, the massive theft, and you introduced and supported and protected the mafia that ruled Afghanistan for the last 20 years. So he should ask himself, you owned it, you broke it, you own it again. Second, between us, my dear friends and colleagues, we have not had a nation state in Afghanistan. We all know that. It was Hazarajat, Ghazni, Badakhshan, Wardak, Bakhtia, etc., etc. You were Pashtun, Tajik, Hazara, Uzbek, etc., etc. We know that Afghanistan continues to be deeply racist, ethnocentric. One ethnicity dominates and has dominated, and this perhaps is the source of our problems. We know that this is a classist society, vast class differences. It's ethnocentric, and it's deeply misogynist. This is the fact of our country. The country is sick in many, many ways, and it needs not just, painkillers, it needs radical surgery, and I don't know when that will happen. So we will go to the Taliban section where we should go from here. We have never really had a real good government or a real good nation. The so-called democracies, progress, reforms, etc., these were all cliches for televisions, for donors, for experts. And as I say, the vast majority of the experts who came and went were only worth their laptops. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so let's move on to the next, if nobody else wants to comment, so let's move on to the next set of questions. So while NGOs are rightly credited for their very amazing humanitarian technical help in the world, and obviously also in Afghanistan, however, their role in Afghanistan had been contentious in the past 20 years. I remember when Dr. I forget his name now, Bashar Dost, when he became Minister of Planning, he immediately wanted to exit NGOs because he said they cause more problems than solutions because they're parallel institutional and state structures that they are building. So while Nojajon has obviously made some very important observations about how women's lives and a lot of good things did take place, what role do you see the overall experience of NGOs? I'd like to ask this question for Zarif Saib and Nojajon. Go ahead, Zarif Saib, you would like to?
Yes, I don't
and
think
international institutions, sorry. NGOs international.
Yes, I don't think that we could put all of them under the same category. So they come in all shapes and sizes and colors and styles. They're very genuine and well-established NGOs who have done similar things in many other settings that have evidence of their success and positive contribution. And they came in and they started establishing their shop and assisting a few others on the ground to also establish some satellite outfits and join the action. And then you had the other ones who were smelling the gold rush, the money. And the minute they figured out that the embassies and international organizations have some funds allocated in their budgets to support the so-called advocacy NGOs, they went around, they found somebody to craft a very nice proposal for them to submit to the embassies and put their hands on cash, basically pocketing more than half of what they've got from these donors as their own salaries and expenses, and the balance they may have probably invested in some small projects inside the main cities or in the periphery, never beyond that. None of them have gone really to far-fetched places in order to reach out to the people who live in the villages and try to assist and change their lives. And then, of course, there are others who are well connected with the establishment. There are either sisters or daughters or wives of the big names in the elite. And they knew how to maneuver around bureaucracy and how to get the attention of the money holders. And then they came up with very fancy charters and manifestos claiming to be aiming for the moon and changing Afghanistan's lot, or at least some segments that they had adopted as their pet project, like women and children or education. These people, they would successfully manage to make a whole lot of money, and a very small portion of that would be really invested in real terms to benefit the population. That's why most of these NGOs evaporated as soon as there was a reduction in the availability of resources. So the so-called commitment to the cause disappeared almost overnight. And some of them are still active outside the country now with big mouth. They're running around and try to present themselves as still utilizable, useful elements in order to still have access to some source of funding by giving lectures or organizing some talk shows and stuff. So I wouldn't put all of them in one category. To those who are genuine pursuers of causes, those who really believed in something and rolled up their sleeves, invested their own resources, benefited from the international community's resources, I salute them, and I bow to them for all the things, the positive things they have done for the constituents that they supported. Contrarily, those who turned this into a money-making enterprise, one could only curse them for making money out of the misery of the Afghan people, for having established their shops for the purpose of seeking either political prominence or putting their hands in the coffer for their own benefits and for the benefit of the clique to which they belong. So that's my opinion. So we should not condemn, we should not embrace all of them in one go. Each one will have to be looked at separately, and their credentials will have to be analyzed based on what they have actually done.
Thank you. I guess, Nojajon, I don't know. Okay, Nojajon, did you want to add anything about and also, do you know the amount of NGOs we might have in Afghanistan? I remember, like in the early 2000s, there were like 6,000 or 9,000 NGOs. How many NGOs do we have now? I mean, are you aware of the amount of NGOs we have in Afghanistan, and what? And you could maybe discuss a little about your own NGOs' work in relation to some others, as Zarif Saib was saying, not all NGOs are the same.
Yeah, well.
Please go ahead.
Yes, so I very much agree with everything that Zarif Saib mentioned about like there are established good reputation NGOs, but there are also those NGOs that unfortunately, because of what they did, it also impacted negatively the well-reputed NGOs as well. In terms of the number of NGOs that you mentioned at the beginning, by beginning, I mean that after 2001,
yeah.
So this 3 or 4 years, the number of NGOs were quite high. Then later, in the last 6-7 years, the number of NGOs decreased. And one reason, there were a number of factors, can be the decrease in funding for Afghanistan, and also more focus on the documentation, on the capacity, on the work in some of the NGOs. So that can be one of the factors. But at this point, that how many are the number of NGOs working? I'm sorry that I don't have that answer. That's about okay. How many are working or active right now at this point. As the question goes, like working with this organization for almost like 8 years in this NGO. So NGOs in Afghanistan, they, I mean, compared to what I mean, it has like if NGOs are run the way it should be, transparency, accountability, they do play, and they did play a significant part in the community and inside Afghanistan. Because they could have access, they could have easily access to those areas. that government did not have access. They could have like a faster response by NGOs rather than government, because government like paper procedures and bureaucracy were much longer compared to the procedures of NGOs. So a faster response was provided, especially when it came to emergency response. For some of the NGO laws also give some freedom for NGOs in terms of their recruitment, that they could recruit the staff, and also when it came to some of the high sensitive projects, I would say even like providing legal or counseling services. So government did not have a direct influence on the those areas. The legal representation of the victim, because like my expertise and work is more with victim of domestic violence and women in Afghanistan. So because we had that independency, we had our defense lawyer, so the government could not directly influence in any thing related to the clients. So there are positive, a number of positive points about like the work of NGOs all over the world and also in Afghanistan. What made the NGOs actually, as Zarif said mentioned, that there were a number of NGOs that the objective were unfortunately like making money, and not they didn't have the respect for the cause that they started, actually the NGO. And I see this because with the system that was in Afghanistan. First thing, it was easily like having an NGO was easy to create an NGO. It wasn't like it didn't go through a difficult process that anybody, I would say, that they wanted to have an NGO, they could just go and follow those easy procedures through Ministry of Economy, and they could have the NGO. And that network with the some of the high-ranking government entities, or even not government entities, with some of the donors, they could help them to win some of the projects without having the proper capacity to implement those projects. When it came to having those projects, I would say that the failure was also writing a good proposal is easy to write for people whose expertise is writing the proposal. But implementation of those projects, that everything that the commitment is within that proposal, that implementation is not so easy. So what happened for some of the NGO, I would say that because they have very good proposal written by a good proposal writer, they could have like those projects, but when it came to the implementation, there were a number of shortcomings, disadvantages, or it wasn't implemented the way it was articulated in the proposal. Okay. And at the same time, not only like that establishing of NGOs, that capacity weren't checked on a regular basis by the government. At the same time, by a number of donors, that the capacity of NGO should have been assessed before a project is handed over to an NGO. Whether do they have a transparent policy? Who the key staff are that they are working in? How are the family relationship there? So these important factors that should have been assessed before a project was given to a specific NGO, it weren't assessed, unfortunately. At the same time,
I'm sorry. Yes. So what you're saying is that the functions that the state, as Tukhisa was saying, that there is no state. So the functions that the state had to take in terms of quality controlling the NGOs by making sure that, and that was not taking place in Afghanistan.
Yeah, so that's I will come next into what you mentioned, Dr. Saib. So NGOs are basically the government authority. Government had full authority to audit, to investigate, and to basically check the accountability and transparency. That authority was with the government. At the same time, the donors also had that authority, because the donors had the authority the audits are hired, that they have to check everything, that what the reports are saying, it is exactly what's done, and there is no corruption and anything. So what happened, because government didn't do the job well, the audits didn't do the job well, so they actually gave the NGOs that they could easily, basically, some of the NGOs, I don't talk about all the NGOs, some of the NGOs, that they could easily pocket that money, because that monitoring and evaluation, that audit, and all the other tools that they could easily disqualify an NGO, it didn't happen. And one thing I want to say short at the end, that what happened actually, which I wasn't in favor of that, and I discussed this in a number of meetings. If an NGO were basically it weren't transparent or weren't accountable, or there were problems that NGO, instead of introducing those officials, those who were directly involved, to the justice easily, they weren't giving any more projects. So this is also something that some they took advantage of that. Yes, thank you very much.
So much.
Yeah, but apart from our NGOs, I would say, like, if there's any questions about what we actually do in Afghanistan, I will be more happy to talk.
Go ahead, please give a few minutes for that, because then we want to go. We're running a little short out of time. But go ahead, say a little about what you're doing. Go ahead, please.
Yes, so Women for Afghan Women organization, that I am the head of this organization at this time, and I started my work like 8 years before. We are the largest women's rights organization in Afghanistan, having close to 1,200 staff in Afghanistan, and provided legal and counseling services to women who are victims of domestic violence. Due to high sensitive nature of the cases that we dealt with, we have tried, and we always, like, that confidentiality of the clients is always important. And we have helped thousands of women around the country, and those provinces that we have operations with counseling services, medical services, vocational training services, and legal services that they asked for. Apart from that, Women for Afghan Women organization is the only NGO in Afghanistan that had services for the children of incarcerated mothers. Because the way it was in Afghanistan, when the mother ended up being in the prison, the relatives and the close family members, they did not, most of them, they did not take the responsibility of the children. So the children also ended up being in the prison with the mothers. So we, through our established procedures, took those children from the prison, add them in our center, 24-hour services, accommodation, medical services, education, and a comprehensive package for those children, and frequent visit of the children with the mothers until the mothers were released in the prison, and they could stay longer until the mother could find. And we're also partner with UNHCR for almost with international donors, working with IDPs and returnees. So it's quite like a well-established NGO in Afghanistan. But in terms of, like, we have tried to work with the community and also maintain confidentiality and the visibility when it's required.
Thank you so much for your work, and we will. So let me wrap up the last question before Q&A. So. How to move forward? I mean, we've analyzed what happened, but I sense two trends here in terms of. So I'm going to combine two questions, questions 4 and 5 that I had sent you guys, the panelists. So, at one level, the question I want to ask, sort of before we open up to Q&A, what's the practical solutions we can have to our disaster situation? But there are two trends I hear. One is. Professor Zarif Saib's sort of observations and analysis that Afghanistan has had a past history of democracy, elections, and a functioning state. It didn't start the last 20 years. And also Professor Dr. Touhi Saib is saying that, at least his observation, it seems, that Afghanistan never really had a modern national state or modern state in the sort of definition that we would really consider it respectful enough to call the Manned state. And so we have these two sort of trends of analysis, and it might be generational. It might be generation that, because I hear a lot from Afghan elders where from the 1940s to the 1990s or 92, Afghanistan had its golden age where there was order, there was some stability. The state was reaching out to the regional areas also slowly. It was slow, but it was moving forward. The Afghanistan, in a lot of ways, I've heard from other books I've read by American scholars, where in the 30s and 40s it was considered the Star of Asia, as a model independent state that was developing and progressing. But yet we also hear that, so the question is, Afghanistan has a legacy, or does it have a legacy of development and highly skilled bureaucratic professionals, a narrative that has at times been challenged and certainly not accepted by a lot of Western scholars who have sort of lost this sort of narrative that Afghanistan has had this legacy of development in a modern state, especially in the last 20 years of sort of this Orientalist weaving of Afghanistan history. How could we learn from its past successes and mistakes of state-led development from between the 1950s and 1990s, and as a model for us to move forward? And maybe perhaps before 1950s, maybe starting with Amullah Khan, what was his mistakes? How could we use these models, the successes of it, and learn from its mistakes to move forward? As a wrap up before we open the Q&A. Anybody, Professor Wahab, anybody would like to take this question first? Go ahead.
Yes. Yeah, forgive me.
No, it's fine.
In my view, there were 3 times where Afghanistan could move forward. Amanullah Khan, Dawood, and the leftists. And all 3 times they were undermined and eliminated by foreign forces and by the local reactionaries. So we lost that chance. Now I would say we're at a different phase, okay? And forgive me if I can just read this to you. Now,
no, please, go ahead.
Yeah, it's December 14th. To move forward, form an inclusive government. 2, open all education institutions to all people in Afghanistan, men, women, majority, minority, etc. 3, pay all the salaries. 4, operationalize the government apparatus. There's no government right now, folks. 5, open the banks, all the banks. 6, reactivate the health system all over the country. 7, establish law and order. 8, allow all people to work, men, women, country people, rural people, urban people, etc. 9, ensure freedom of expression. 10, respect human rights of all people, men, women, minority, majority. 11, disallow all terrorists. Disallow them to use Afghanistan as a base. 12, end the drug industry. 13, reverse the brain drain. This really bothered me. We have lost the best and our brightest for the last 40, 50 years. I'm sorry, people must seek the better lives. But let's say right now, we could take out 1 million Afghans and bring them to Portland, Oregon, or Virginia. What about the other 33 million? So reverse the brain drain. The government must do whatever it can to bring people back to Afghanistan and build it. 14, observe amnesty for all. 15, promote inter-ethnic harmony between the Pashtuns, Hazaras, Tajiks, Uzbeks, Turkmens, and everybody. No ethnic domination. 16, new constitution and new election to be announced. 17, shift away from the neoliberal so-called modernization program, indigenous Afghan sustainable long-term development plans. 18, build independent civil society. 19, normalize government and life, like have a normal government and normal life. No entering people's homes, do not interfere in people's private lives. De-link Afghanistan's economic development from global capitalism and imperialism. These are the things that the government must do, whatever its name is, Shah, Republic, Mullah, Emirat, whatever it is, these things will need to be done or else there is no country. But also we need foreigners to do certain things, and if I am allowed, I can read that list for you, but without foreigners either supporting actively or, going away, this cannot be done. So I don't know when you will, can I read the other list for the foreigners?
Is it long? Go ahead, because we just want to have...
the
please,
foreigners.
Yeah.
I don't like this humanitarian talk, but just do this to the Americans and its so-called allies. I would say engage and recognize the current government. Unfreeze all foreign Afghan assets. End all sanctions. Cease political, diplomatic, economic, and psychological warfare on Afghanistan, the country. 5, provide immediate massive humanitarian aid, like in a day, in a week. 6, return stolen money, the money that was stolen by Americans, Europeans, Afghans, Afghan Americans, and everybody else, whether they were generals, civilians, NGO, whoever it was. Billions of dollars were all stolen, say Jeffrey Sachs would tell us. Very little of the money got to the target population. Detain and main criminals, all criminals, Afghans, Americans, Afghan Americans, wherever they are, in Dubai, in America, wherever they are, they need to be prosecuted. Establish special tribunals to try all warlords, American warlords, Afghan warlords, and other warlords. Pay reparation to Afghanistan, to individuals and the country. The United States must pay reparation. 10, establish a UN trust fund, development fund, and a peacekeeping force. Unless there's a peacekeeping force in Afghanistan in about a month, there will be a civil war again. Finally, end genocide, end genocide, end genocide, and guarantee Afghanistan's independence, sovereignty, territorial integrity, and dignity. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Professor Wahab. Please, Zarif Saib and then Touhi Saib, Dr. Touhi. Just if you guys want to make any last points before we go to Q&A. We already are.
Yes, already I was prompted by a question asked by the audience. A certain Sayyaha actively engages in exchanges, and he said, "Where do we go from here?" I think that was a good question, and
right.
That really gets us focused on what next.
Right. What next?
Yeah, part of that is already answered by Professor Zahir Wahab, and I'm really grateful that he came up with a very structured list of issues that need to be addressed. I would probably not push for recognition as yet, but engagement certainly, because they're the de facto authorities on the ground. They're the ones on whom the safety, security, and well-being of the people now rests. Therefore, there has to be active engagement with the powers that be in Kabul with a view to resuscitating the institutions of state, particularly those that are responsible for providing public services, to do what they're supposed to be doing in the area of health, education, safety, security, transportation, all the other services. And also to immediately address the impending humanitarian catastrophe that's now threatening the majority of the Afghan population, particularly those that are way beyond the normal reach of the central government. So that we have to really prioritize these. And we should do this not only by talking to ourselves, each of us should engage the decision makers in wherever we live, in our states, in the capital, or whatever country that we live in, to approach those that are in a position to make a difference in the formulation of policies, and pressurize them to expediting national decisions to be made in favor of rapid engagement, provision of assistance, and all the other items that Professor Wahab narrated. So that would be my own observation. There is an organization, Professor Nawabi, you're aware of that organization, which is called IRADA. This is the organization of Afghan diaspora, bringing Afghans from all over the world.
Right.
They're planning to send a delegation very soon to Kabul, headed by its current chairman. And the message is for the authorities to assume full responsibility for the role that they have to play as the authorities on the ground, and to also show some signals, positive signals, that would encourage the other side, the Westerners and the population, to start building bridges of trust with them and to engage with them in a positive way. So the list that Dr. Wahab gave could also come handy to the visiting delegation of IRADA to pick and choose, perhaps not all of it, the ones that can be sold to the Taliban, and try to engage them on reaching out and opening channels of communication. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Professor Touhi, thank you, Professor Zarif Saib. Thank
you. So I lend my support to the excellent list presented by Professor Wahab. I would like to caution, though, that we can be idealist about what's ahead, but we also have to see what the reality is in Afghanistan. I think Afghanistan is caught in a complex web of regional entanglements and trans-regional entanglements. The fact is that there are so many different powers or different interests involved in Afghanistan even today. What the current rulership can do for now is to try and reduce the suffering of the Afghan population by engaging with the world. I think before the world can recognize the Taliban must recognize the world. This is 21st century. I don't think there are elements within the leadership of the Taliban that have understood that, but I think there are other elements that have not really recognized that this is 21st century, that this is a different world. This is a highly globalized world. I think once the dust settles, these people will go away. I have no doubt. There's no doubt in my mind that these people will go away, given that the trend of technology and the direction of the world. So I think it would be in their best interest to come to that recognition, to look at the world and see where the world is going. And I think they have a good chance to do that. I think if they are wise, they can use this as an opportunity. Engage with their own population, engage with their own elite, even if they are of different opinions, and try to also engage with the world. If that doesn't happen, I think they will be repeating the mistakes of some of the previous rulers of Afghanistan. And I think that would be disastrous both for the Taliban and for the Afghan population. I think what we see right now in Afghanistan is that the country is moving in a direction that a kind of what I would call a model of shared governance, where the Taliban are, the former rulers of the country, but they cannot actually govern the country because they don't have the resources. So they are inviting the world, the same forces that they were fighting for 20 years, they are now trying to invite them back to the country. So it's quite ironic. But I think slowly they will realize that governing a society as complex as Afghanistan is very different from trying to destroying or fighting a government or destroying the economic and social basis of a society. I think that model of shared governance is the direction for Afghanistan, that you have the Taliban providing security, but at the same time allowing regional and international institutions to, you know, provide the necessary assistance to the population so that Afghanistan can move forward. And I hope that really the Taliban leadership sees this opportunity, use it as a way of, I think, helping their own population, but also bolstering their own image and legitimacy.
Thank you, Professor Touhi. Thank you very much. I agree with the Taliban need to recognize the world before they also get recognized. But I really would like to get a hold of Professor Wahab's list. If you can, you know, we'll follow up after this talk. Now, Jajan, I know you have to leave for something else before we open up the Q&A. Did you want to make any last-minute observations before you leave? If I get you have. Did you want to?
Yes.
Make it. Go ahead, please. Thank you.
Yes, so it's a kind of, I mean, it's really upsetting, and it's a kind of difficult that after 20 years that we fought for the basic rights for women, after 20 years, we again have to fight for those basic rights of education, right to work, and also to have access to medical services, to the legal services, and so on. It's a kind of accepting that the whole way that we all came after 20 years, so they kind of go backward and again work for all these basic rights. Mm-hmm. It is very upsetting. It's very discouraging for a number of women rights activists and also the people who are inside Afghanistan and they are banned of those basic rights. And at the same time, I would say, because looking at the current situation in Afghanistan, so of course, like there are emergency response at this time and also like a long-term solution. So when it comes to emergency response for this, we know that the starvation in the country, the collapse of the financial, close to collapse of the financial crisis in Afghanistan, the banks, and also like the markets. So these are like the emergency response should be from the international community, and also how the role of the NGOs, that they can have like those authority and given to them, those resources, provide them to them. By resources, I do not only mean the resources, financial resources from the international, but at the same time, those facilities and arrangement provided by the new government, by this current government, that they could easily provide support to the people and long-term solutions. So our colleagues gave a list and also described it in a more detailed and academic way. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Najajan. Thank you. So if you guys, if you don't mind, we will open up the floor to Q&A for another like 20 minutes or so, and then we'll call it the day. Is that okay, Professor Touhi, Zaif Saib and Wahab? Okay, thank you. I appreciate the fact that you have the stamina to sit for 2 hours. It's not easy to get the blood flowing. Thank you so much. So let's start. Let's go to the Q&A, and let's see some questions that... So are you planning to have a good time for Q&A? I believe. So I see some of these questions. Afghanistan is a state, but not a nation state. It's not Portugal or Japan or Bangladesh, has several independent and conflicting ethnicities. What do you see as commonalities between them that will help to forge a better state that accommodate all ethnicities? That's one question. So I don't know. It's essentially saying that we have a country that has different ethnicities that are not always in harmonious relationship. How do you see some commonalities between these ethnicities that can then bring us together to forge us into a nation state? Professor Touhi, since you are also writing a book on this, why don't you take that and then go ahead.
Sure.
Did you get the question?
I think our ethnic diversity can be a source of strength for our country if it is managed properly, and it's for it to be managed properly.